Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, October 6th, 2025. Ray McGovern will be with us in just a moment. Why do the European elites hate the Russians? But first, this. While the markets are giving us whiplash, have you seen the price of gold? It's soaring. In the past 12 months, gold has risen to more than $3,000 an ounce. I'm so glad I bought my gold. It's not too late for you to buy yours. The same experts that predicted gold at $3,200 an ounce now predict gold at $4,500 or more in the next year. What's driving the price higher? Paper currencies. All around the world, they are falling in value. Big money is in panic as falling currencies shrink the value of their paper wealth. That's why big banks and billionaires are buying gold in record amounts. As long as paper money keeps falling, they'll keep buying, and gold will keep rising. So do what I did. Call my friends at Lear Capital. You'll have a great conversation, and they'll send you very helpful information. Learn how you can store gold in your IRA tax and penalty free or have it sent directly to your doorstep. There's zero pressure to buy and you have a 100% risk-free purchase guarantee. It's time to see if gold is right for you. Call 800-511-4620, 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeNap.com and tell them your friend the judge sent you. Ray McGovern, welcome here, my dear friend. The Cold War has been over for 35 years. Are the Russians still demonized in U.S. intelligence agencies?
I'm afraid they have been. I don't know whether Tulsi Gabbard is going to be able to turn things around. But, when you say demonized, that's really the word. And I would just point to some remarks that Ambassador Jack Matlock, a good friend of mine, who was ambassador to the Soviet Union in its last days, what he said about the deterioration in relations and why we're at the pass that we've reached now. And he said, look, if it wasn't for Russiagate, if it weren't for brainwashing the American people to think that the Russians gave us Donald Trump, the Russians interfered in our elections in 2016. They all did all manner of terrible things, and now they've invaded a country in an unprovoked manner. Well, they're all lies because the Russians didn't do that. It was provoked up and down. So, yeah, there's a large tissue of lies that has to be gotten through. And I run into this all the time, not only around the neighborhood, but also talking to audiences like I just did at the University of USC, University of Southern California.
When you joined the CIA and the Cold War was still on, I suppose it was a little bit easier to demonize the Russians. They were the adversaries. We were trying to steal their secrets. They were trying to steal our secrets. They were a communist repressive / socialist society. We're the good guys. We have to make them like us. Fair analogy?
Yeah, and that's important because, I thought I was pretty much well up on Russia. And, I was just getting out of grammar school when Stalin died, but I learned a lot in subsequent years. I didn't know that the Russians had offered to join NATO. I didn't know that. My friend Jeff Roberts had uncovered that by going into the Soviet archives and picking out the foreign minister papers written by Molotov and Malenkov and how they made these overtures to NATO. Now, it's really interesting because the Presidium had to really cover its rear end because this is amazing, but they did it. Now, that was in 1954. Putin mentions it at Valdai. Now, the next year, what happens? The Russians create the Warsaw Pact. Whoa, wait a second now. I thought the Warsaw Pact was created in reaction. I thought that the NATO was created in reaction to the Warsaw Pact. No, it wasn't. NATO was created in 1949.
Right.
Warsaw Pact, 1955. Now, that really wasn't in my active imagination for many years until I try to assimilate this stuff. This is history. It's documented. And the whole notion about how the Cold War started, needs a little rejiggering, even in minds like mine who pretend to know a
Why
lot about
do
Russian history.
why do European elites, whether it's Emmanuel Macron or Frederick Merz or Keir Starmer or Mrs. Maloney in Italy, why do European elites hate the Russians?
Money. The military-industrial complex is just as powerful in Europe as it is here. If you don't have an enemy, my God, it almost came to not having an enemy when Putin rehabilitated the Russia and sort of around 214, 115. My God, how could you build a common European battle tank if there was no threat from Russia? Well, that was 2013. 2014, we had the coup in Kiev, and all of a sudden, Russia had planned this thing, had planned to take over Crimea and all this stuff. All this poppycock justifying, well, what happened? Maffei and a French firm were building the common European battle tank, and whoa, their stock went shoot like that. And then finally, what was it? The other firm sued Maffei and said, or the other way around. Maffei said, "You're trying to build a common European battle tank now. No, we have the rights to that." They settled it out of court, and both firms are making billions, not millions, billions of bucks on this threat from Russia, which now they justify by the unprovoked nature of the Russian entry into Ukraine.
Do you think that there are no longer rules of war that nations follow, as Alistair Crook has argued, that in fact there's a straight line between Netanyahu's slaughter of the Gazans and Donald Trump's blowing speedboats out of the water in the Caribbean?
Well, Trump, I think, was impelled first and foremost by the desire to show how tough he was. In other words, what happened in Beijing, and it looked like the world was turning against the U.S. and the West, so to speak. So he had to show some muscle. It came directly after the Beijing thing. But this is really, there is no rule anymore. Now, when was the last time? Well, the last time it really mattered in a nuclear environment was when John Kennedy made that wonderful speech at American University in June 1963. I had just joined the CIA. And what he said was, look, the main thing we have to avoid, our two nuclear powers, Russia and us at the time, Soviet Union, is to make sure that we never backed up the other into a choice between abject surrender and using nuclear weapons. Now that was the Cold War rules, or those war rules of engagement. Now, with respect to Ukraine, we backed the Russians up to where they entered Ukraine, and then we, through our proxies, tried to back the Russians into what they call a strategic defeat. And, they're not going to be strategically defeated by anybody on their border when they see an existential threat coming. That's just the rules of the road.
What basis is there, legal or political, I guess mainly political, to stop a ship on high seas that has no arms, that is filled with civilians, that is carrying food, water, and medication for Gaza?
Oh, none at all. I thought you were going to talk about the French intercepting that that cargo ship with oil. No, there's no basis at all in that. And of course, I was on one of those flotillas, 2011, and they just do what they want. And I don't know how strongly the White House talked to Netanyahu and said, "Please don't." There's a lot of American veterans, a lot of American people there. That please don't do that. Well, these gutsy people, and I applaud Greta Thunberg especially for her persistence. Nevertheless, she persisted, one might say. I applaud these people because there are new boats going, new boats, okay? and they have doctors, and they have journalists. They're not going to stop. And we'll have to see if Maloney of Italy says, "Oh, please keep away from the trouble and just be there in case you can pick up the people who are thrown overboard." Okay, or whether she'll step up to all the demonstrations now in Italy, and whether the Spaniards, who also have a battleship or have a warship in the area, whether they'll do something more than just wring their hands and pick up the people who are still alive in the Mediterranean Sea.
What basis is there for the French to have stopped a civilian Russian tanker in the high seas? President Putin called it piracy. I think he's 100% correct.
Yeah, that's the basis in law, piracy.
Yeah.
In other words, it's an outright violation of law. Now, it's interesting how Putin explained it. He says, why do they do these things? Well, look at the chaos in places like France now. My God, here's a guy who conceives himself as a Napoleon. That rings some really strong bells in Russian minds, right? Napoleon, a little Napoleon, and his country is falling apart. So he's got to divert attention somehow. So he grabs one of the ships that he said that people say has Russian oil in it. My God. Well, if further proof were needed, Judge, as you know, the French government fell this morning. I think it was the fourth prime minister they had in less than a year. And he gave up just one day after he had pointed all his, my God,
Cabinet.
the place is falling apart. So yeah, it's to distract. And Lavrov made the same point with respect to tomahawks and other things. Largely, they're to distract attention from the problems that these geniuses in Berlin and Paris and London, they can't cope with the problems that they face.
The French Constitution says that the government shall be run by the prime minister with his cabinet. He had just installed the cabinet, and now they're gone and he's gone. So you're right. This is the fourth one in a year, the fifth one in 2 years. One wonders what's going to become of the French government. Chris has put together an interesting back-to-back on the START treaty. So we're going to run this clip. I know you want to talk about this. This is fascinating. First, President Putin, then the American press secretary, who often doesn't make any sense, but does here, Carolyn Levitt, and then the president of the United States surprisingly agreeing with President Putin. Chris, cut number 9.
After February 5th, 2026, Russia is prepared to continue adhering to the central quantitative limits of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty for 1 year. Going forward, based on an analysis of the situation, we will make a decision if we continue adhering to these voluntary self-limitations. We believe this measure will only be viable if the United States acts in a similar manner.
The president is aware of this offer extended by President Putin, and I'll let him comment on it later. I think it sounds pretty good, but he wants to make some comments on that himself, and I will let him do that.
President Putin offers to keep limits on nuclear arms for 1 more year to then hopefully negotiate a new treaty. Sounds like a good idea to me.
Fresh everyone's memory, please, on what the START treaty was.
Well, it severely limits the number of intercontinental missiles, whether they're ICBMs launched from the land or whether they're submarine launched ballistic missiles. Now, they're tightly controlled. The limits have been in place for two terms of the START treaty now, and it expires on February 5th of this coming year. So this was an initiative about 2.5 weeks ago, if memory serves. Putin made this initiative, utter silence. And when Putin was asked about this at Valdai on the 1st of October, the whole tenor was, well, doesn't the U.S. respond? Even if it's going to say no, would it really respond? Now, I'm not surprised that the response seems to be positive. Now, caveat, Trump may say tomorrow, it's a bad idea. I thought it was a good idea yesterday. So caveat that. But this is the real hope. If the Russians and the Russians did mention this or raise it at in Alaska, so this is, if we can get started on arms control, just as John Kennedy persuaded Khrushchev, look, we can do it, a limited test ban treaty, and that will loosen these things, and we can get a better rapprochement, even détente. If we can start that, and the Russians seem ready to do that, Kirillov, one of Putin's major lieutenants, economic guy, financial guy, said, look, this is really good. He said, look, the probability of the outcome of relations here, the probability of the outcome of the introduction of these talks is quite high. So Kirillov said that, not Putin. They go waiting until a couple of days to see if Trump changes his mind.
Right.
He has all kinds of opposition to this. If he can move on this, he can move on other things. So that's a good sign.
He'll have opposition from everybody around him, from Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton to General Kellogg and Secretary Rubio and Sebastian Gorka. President Putin's comment was on September 22nd. President Trump's response was yesterday, October 5th. Here's Dmitry Peskov on Saturday, Chris, cut number 8.
Certainly we welcome such a statement and believe that it already provides grounds for optimism in the sense that the United States supports this initiative of President Putin.
There you have it.
Yeah.
I think you were right all along that there was more to the Anchorage, Alaska meeting than met the eye. If there's now a meeting of the minds on something as critical as START.
Well, Judge, it's not rocket science. If you look how the Russians have been really careful to separate their attempt to make a better relationship with the United States from whatever else goes on. Ukraine, U.S., Israel attacks on Iran. After each of these major kerfuffles, the Russians said publicly, look, this is on a different plane. We need first and foremost to do this. Now, my notion is that the president's daily briefer for Putin is telling him Trump is not well. He's not okay. You know what that means, Vladimir Vladimirovich? He's not okay. So Putin said, what does that mean? Well, just be guided by the fact that the guy who has his fingers on the codes there or whatever they are, he's not okay. So what I saw Putin doing at Valdai was bending over backwards. You could almost say to appease Trump, but also to ingratiate with himself. Oh man, he's most comfortable guy ever. He's the most comfortable guy to talk to. Lukyanov says, you're the only guy in the world that thinks he's the most comfortable guy to talk to. And yet Putin goes on. He bent over backwards to say, look, we have a pretty decent relationship. He didn't apparently know quite yet that Trump was going to say what he said yesterday, but there's real prospects for peace. And this Tomahawk thing, which entered into the fray again, bear in mind, Lavrov answered that question 2 days before Putin was asked it. And they both answered the same thing. I said, look, number one, it's not going to change anything on the battlefield. Number two, this is mostly to satisfy the Europeans. The U.S. really sees a need to make sure the Europeans think that the U.S. takes their view seriously. And what else? Oh, yeah, well, we had ATACMS missiles. And what came out of that? Well, Russian air defenses put them down. Lastly, and this is key, he's asked, as Lavrov was, will this damage relations? How about the light at the end of the tunnel, Vladimir? Will this damage? No, there's only one answer to that, of course. He said, these things can't be manned. They can't even be delivered without U.S. help. That won't work. And it's going to be, well, of course, it's going to damage things. How else is he going to answer this? So the reality is it's a red herring. It's a red herring, but there ain't no Tomahawk could ever be used by Ukraine, even if they go circuitously through through the Netherlands or Spain or something like that.
Right,
It
right.
won't be able to do that for 3 years, Judge. So this is artificial stuff, and it's had its impact. The Europeans are really happy about that.
In the meantime, your former colleagues, so maybe they weren't there when you were there, but CIA are still with MI6 helping Ukraine aim American and British weapons to kill Russian soldiers. Correct?
That's true, but I don't think that would be very short-lived. I think it will be short-lived. I think by and by, the situation on the ground is becoming ever more precarious for the Ukrainian forces. Many of them are surrounded. I think Putin himself talked about hundreds of thousands deserting. And so they have these cauldrons. It's just a matter of how fast Putin wants to move ahead. And I think he sees this as a bargaining chip. If Trump can come around and make believe this will be a negotiated end to the war, that would be good for everybody, particularly if the West takes seriously the core interests of Russia, which are not to have NATO in Ukraine.
Ray McGovern, thank you. A great conversation, my dear friend. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and analysis with you. We'll look forward to seeing you with Larry Johnson on Friday.
Thank you, Judge.
Sure. All the best, my dear friend. And the aforementioned Larry Johnson will be here at 11:30 this morning. At 2 o'clock, Max Blumenthal. At 3 o'clock, Scott Ritter. At 4 o'clock, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.